Good morning, everyone. So I am coming on just a few minutes early to make sure this works. Alan has been up since the early hours of the morning trying to help me make sure that I could do this from my computer. So we'll give it a little bit of time before we actually get started with anything to make sure that it's working. So before we get started, to kill a little bit of time, I want to take a book out of Daphne Scott on her super fantastic leadership show. She does these appreciations at the start of their show, and I love them so much. They're one of my favorite parts of the show every time. But Cruz, would you mind just giving me a thumbs up if you can hear me and if this is working or saying something? We'll find out. But anyway, appreciation. So I want to take a minute this morning. Cool, thanks, Cruz. And give an appreciation for Alan Fredendall because, hey, Cruz, because really over the last week, I've just reflected on how thankful I am for him as a friend, as a wonderful human being. And then this morning, as I was trying to figure all this stuff out, and I was texting Alan frantically, how do I go live from my computer? He just jumped on it, and it made me realize what an incredible person he is, what a good friend he has been to me. He did a really awesome talk for our APHPT certification graduate group last week on Connect and Tribe, and I was just like, you know what? I am really, really glad to have this human being as a part of my tribe. So Alan, I appreciate you, and you'll probably cut this out because you're such a humble person. But yeah, if you don't know Alan, and if you don't get to see all the things that he does behind the scenes, not just at ICE, but he's gotten involved in the APHPT, and I swear he is involved in every facet of it, making sure that it works. And he's also who I call if anything in my life isn't working. And so I just really appreciate him. So we're getting up on the 8:30 mark. We'll give everyone just a few more minutes to roll in. Hopefully it's not too distracting. I'm sitting at a random Starbucks, kind of in the parking lot, on my way to the clinic. But hopefully it won't be too distracting for either you guys or for me. So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So today's topic for me, on these Mondays with a Pop, we tend to talk a lot about population level health, population health management. We talk a little bit about kind of lifestyle PT. And this morning, what I'm going to be talking about is motivational interviewing. So it's a little bit more on that individual level, that lifestyle PT level. But what I'm really starting to realize, the more I study this stuff and the more that I'm a student of it, is that behavior change within a population you could make an argument that it really stems from behavior change in the key individuals within that population. So the people that we talk about as the influencers, because we know that it really only takes 20 to 30% of a population to adopt a behavior, to make a change for the rest of that population to tip. So if we can get really good at our skills on the individual level of kind of tipping an individual's behavior to the behavior that we desire, then I think if we can couple that with the ability to identify those influencers, then that's where, we easily can take an individual level skill and make an impact on an entire population. And so where this idea for this talk really started was I'm in the Lifestyle PT course right now, which is taught by Jeremy Fletcher. And right now it's a small group. We're in our first cohort, and it's all people that have went through the APHPT certification course. And last Monday, we all got on and did this exercise as we're learning about motivational interviewing. And we were paired up with an individual on our go-to meeting, and one person was the therapist and one person was the patient or the client. And, we were kind of role-playing these motivational interviewing scenarios. And I was paired up with Jeremy, which was pretty amazing because if you haven't gotten the chance to talk to Jeremy or watch his PT on ICEs, he is an expert in this skill. And so long story short, I could really talk about the experience for a long time, but he motivationally interviewed me. And about 15 minutes later, my mind was blown. Because we see kind of these cheesy YouTube videos, or we learn about it in school. Oh yeah, you should use this type of communication style. But having actually went through the process myself and hearing the things that came out of my mouth and seeing how my thought process about a behavior that I've been trying to change in my own life for a long time, and not really being effective at it, not because of lack of education, of knowing it's important, but just not going through this thought process of why it was so important to me. So 15 minutes later, my mind was blown. I was pretty convinced this was something that I had to get more comfortable with. And I felt this instant, closer connection to not only Jeremy, but to the people that were in the discussion alongside me that kind of gave me that accountability. So that's a little background for why I chose this topic. So let's talk about motivational interviewing to start with. The definition of it is really, it's just an effective way of talking to people about behavior change. The goal of it is to really uncover, to shed some light on, and eventually to resolve a person's ambivalence, which ambivalence is this kind of dichotomy of I want to, but I don't want to make a change at the same time. It's really that pros or cons, that on one hand, I want to stop eating a candy bar every day, but on the other hand, it tastes so good. Thanks, Mark Selek, for that. That kind of on one hand, on the other hand. But what we need to realize about this ambivalence is that it's a really normal part of behavior change, right? So it is absolutely crucial almost to have that ambivalence for us to move on to change. And oftentimes it leads to procrastination, right? It's the reason we don't start a change. By others, that ambivalence can be perceived as resistance. So I feel like we do this a lot in physical therapy. We educate our patients on something, on a change we want them to make, let's say doing their HEP. And then they come back in and they're like, well, I wanted to, and it was important, but I had all this going on. And to us, we can sometimes perceive that as resistance, or they don't value what we have to say. But if we look at it as it's just a normal part of change, it's this ambivalence, it's a really normal part of change, and it lets us to kind of view that and not take offense to it, not take it personally. So if you look into some of the research and the literature behind motivational interviewing, you'll see a couple terms. You'll see things like the spirit of motivational interviewing, the core skills, or ORS, which we'll talk about a little bit today, and the 4 processes of motivational interviewing. But what I want to talk about is kind of my very beginner's take on it. I really just started implementing this stuff, or trying to implement. I don't even think we can say I'm effectively doing it within the last week. And so I wanted to share with you guys the 7 lessons that I learned in my first 7 days of motivational interviewing. So these are not necessarily what the research says. This is the diary of Allie Hartman, so that could be kind of scary, but we'll go with it. Number 1, open-ended questions set the foundation. So we realize that there's incredible value in asking people open-ended questions, right? Things like, tell me more about, what do you think about, what happened if, tell me more. We know they're valuable. It sets the foundation for all the other core skills that we'll talk about in motivational interviewing, the ORS skills. So ORS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And what I realized this week is that it's almost impossible to summarize a yes or no answer, right? So if we aren't asking people questions that are open-ended, it really limits our ability to capitalize on the other core skills of motivational interviewing. The reality is that, at least in my own very early practice, I do not use them enough. So we had to record our an initial evaluation and count the number of closed versus open-ended questions, and mine was about 5 closed to 1 open-ended question. So I think it's easy as physical therapists, we feel like we need to gather all this data so quickly in that initial eval to get the clinical picture and know what we're treating. And what I realized is that all that pressure to kind be productive and get what I needed led to me really shortchanging the patient in their ability to reflect and engage in some of these conversations to behavior change. So open-ended questions set the foundation. Number 2, a roadmap is essential, but you have to embrace that there's going to be detours. So you need to know where you're going when you engage in conversations about behavior change. You need to know that there's certain stops that you're going to take throughout the conversation, but you have to understand that you have really no idea when you start the conversation exactly how you're going to get to those stops. So what you do need to do in setting out that roadmap is you need to kind of first identify what is the behavior I'm trying to change within this conversation, or trying to facilitate the individual to change within this conversation. And then you become the trail guide in helping to guide along that roadmap. So you need to help them identify what it is they want to do, how they think it would be best to do it, and why. What is the significance? What is the impact on their life? So if you have that as a roadmap, then no matter what direction you get in the conversation, you can always bring it back to center. Good. So roadmap is essential. Next, OARs are for more than just kayaking. So OARs are those core skills that we talked about it. The O stands for open-ended questions, right? That is the foundation. Then we have affirmation. So this is really affirming the positive behaviors that an individual brings up. And this is going to increase their confidence. This is going to increase their self-efficacy and bring the power back to the patient. Help them feel like, you know what? Yeah, I am doing a good job on a lot of these domains. So let's take our candy bar example. If they said, well, you know, I feel like I do a good job when I'm at home because I've learned to just keep candy out of the house. It's when I get in a social setting and it's all around me that I can't say no. An affirmation would be, wow, it sounds like you have some really solid habits established to keep this stuff out of your house. That's awesome. That helps them feel confident in their abilities to tackle this change. The R is reflections. So this is our opportunity to listen to a patient's statement, to really listen, to understand what they're saying, and then state it back to the patient. So that would be statements that start with, it sounds like, and then you kind of briefly summarize and reflect back to the patient what it was they said. It sounds like you're having a little bit of a hard time when you get into that social situation and other people are enjoying candies. It shows that you're listening. And then finally, the S is summaries. So these are longer reflections of more than one client statement. And these show deep understanding. And what I really think as I've thought about these summaries is that they really start to build that therapeutic alliance between you and the patient, because it conveys to them that you are not only able to listen to about 2 or 3 minutes of kind of of a conversation and a discussion, but you were listening to and understanding to such a point that you could take that and process it and state it back to them in a way that is meaningful and that demonstrates true understanding and compassion. So that's OARs. Lesson number 4, scales, aka change rulers, are your friend. So these are one of my favorite things I think that I experimented with in my first week. And these change rulers are really related to kind of 3 things that I played with this week. I'm sure you could expand them. But one is readiness. So that is on a scale of 0 to 10, tell me how ready you are to make this change, whatever the change may be. Importance, same 0 to 10 scale. How important is it for you to make this change? And third is confidence. So on that 0 to 10 scale, how confident are you in your ability to make that change? The key to these change rulers is that after you ask one of the questions, you're going to follow up with, wow, great. What got you all the way up to a whatever number they said, let's say 4 or 5, rather than a 1 or a 2. And then you listen and you go back to your OR skills. So then it gives you a chance to, whatever they say, well, you know, I know that it's important for me to stop eating candy because it's better for my overall health. You can then go back to your reflections and reflect back to the patient and reinforce their beliefs and their thoughts about what's going on, and kind of reinforce that positive realization. Then you can follow it up with, okay, so what would it take for you to be at a blank, a higher number, a 7 or an 8? And once again, once they state that, you go back to your oars, you affirm the positive things that they said, you reflect back some of the topics that they brought up, and you can summarize at the end of your use of the change rulers. So change rulers are your friend. Number 5, change is a process, not an incident. So I know from an inexperienced point of view, I often felt like I had to do all this at one time, that I was going to have the conversation about behavior change, and then the person was going to change their behavior, and that would be that. But what I realized is that this behavior change is not a one and done scenario, right? It occurs over time, not at one point in time. And so we do not have to do all of this in one sitting, right? It really shouldn't be done all in one sitting. It's too much. But I think there is so much power in asking an individual asking permission to follow up with them. And then if you ask permission and they say yes, then actually following up with them. So I know in my experience, sometimes I've embarked in these conversations, or I've even given them some sort of handout or some sort of resource or an app. And I said, okay, is it okay if I follow up with you on this? They say yes, and then I don't. And that's not really helpful, because this is a process, not an incident that occurs at one point in time. Number 6, I'll go through this one pretty quickly. This is not about educating people. So I think oftentimes as we kind of want to put on our educator role, and we want to impart knowledge on the person about their condition or about what we think. But the truth is that this is really more about facilitating a discussion, guiding that discussion, where the person uncovers the solutions for themselves with us using our expertise as a guide. It's so much more powerful. We all know that when someone tells us to do something, we're not nearly as likely to do it as if we tell ourselves that we think we should do something, right? So it's really not about educating, it's about guiding and facilitating. And finally, lesson number 7, this is kind of derived from one of my favorite Jeff-isms. I think Mitch said that last week and I really like it, but and, not or, right? We say it all the time, and I'm starting to believe it relates to everything in life. But this is not a skill of now I am doing motivational interviewing, right? And now I'm not. Or this is a patient I'm going to motivationally interview, or I'm not. Or I do or I don't do this skill. There's certainly parts of our process, and there's certainly situations where it's not appropriate, right? We're not going to motivationally interview someone on, what is the worst that your symptoms get up to? Why do you feel that way? And all these things. But we have to understand that if we stop looking at it as this dichotomous, I'm either doing or not doing, I do it or I don't, and looking at more of the spirit of who we are and what we do as physical therapists. I always love that Mike says, we're problem solvers. That's who we are, and that's what we do. And combining that with one of my favorite, I don't even know when he said it, but Jeff said, we don't fix people. We help people strategize on how to fix themselves. And so I think if we can really frame it in that way, that this isn't something that we, okay, I step into the room and now I am going to do motivational interviewing. If it becomes this undertone of our entire interaction, I think it really sets an environment and sets the stage for not just behavior change, but building a really, really meaningful connection with the person that we're sitting with. Because at the end of the day, that was one of the most powerful things about my experience with Jeremy was, I instantly felt this closer connection. I felt this sense of trust and confidence in him and the people that were in the conversation, that I felt like I had a group of people that were around me to make this change. And to me, that is one of the most powerful things we can do for our patients or for our clients or within our personal relationships. I think this is something Alan started using it with his wife, and I think it's awesome. I secretly have been doing that with my husband over the past week, but please don't let him know that. So in summary, 7 lessons learned. Open-ended questions set the foundation. You have to have a roadmap, but understand that there are going to be detours, and those detours are beautiful. Oars are your core skills, and they're really going to set the stage and guide you through the process. Scales or change rulers are your friend. Change is a process, not an incident. This is not a one and done scenario. It's not about educating, it's about facilitating. And not or. Let it become the spirit of who we are and what we do as problem solvers. So, little action item to leave the day. I hope that was helpful to give you just a little insight into a very beginner's view of motivational interviewing. So if you're up for it, pick one of those things to implement in the clinic today. I think a real easy one is the change rulers. So pick either use a readiness, importance, or competence change ruler with one of your patients and see. It's super easy to use with HEPs. How confident are you that you'll be able to do the HEP as we discussed today, and see where the conversation goes. So thank you all so much for listening. I hope this was helpful. Sorry, it was a little long. I'm at 16 minutes on my talking, plus I had to brag about Alan for a little bit. So I hope everyone has a great Monday, and I'll talk to you next time.